Stand first. When a trendy new market cafe went under in 2018, the owner left behind a trail of debt right across Auckland. 2 years on, the full extent of Barnaby Bews' failure as a businessman is still being felt. In the second part of our investigation, we talk to a group of people who knew Barnaby Bews in different ways but ultimately share the same feelings for the man. Exclusive. Standing little more than 5 foot, to look at Angela Pyle you'd probably think she was a bit of a pushover. But if stand back and look again, you'll see honey and wildfire are in this case both the color gold. Behind that warm, inviting exterior, Pyle has a toughness and resilience that comes from surviving 3 decades working with some of the biggest names in business: L'Oreal, Estee Lauder, Ray White and Barfoot and Thompson, to name drop just a few. Ordinarily, the name Barnaby Bews wouldn't be uttered anywhere near such distinguished company, but through his brief involvement with Pyle here he is dragging up the rear. Or more the case, there he was. 4 years on, Pyle remembers vividly the first time Barnaby Bews entered her consciousness. He was overweight, disheveled, unkempt and smoking a cigarette outside Zabo, the perfect advertisement for a food service business. The cafe owner, neighbor and wannabe captain of industry who in the years that'd follow would become the business equivalent of a painful appendicitis. That's how Pyle remembers it. If 30 years in business has taught Pyle anything, it's that first impressions count. In Bews' case, Pyle says, they counted for very little. A cafe owner who looked like he belonged on a council rubbish truck, she said. Pyle, as it would happen, was in the branded apparel business as the director of Recognize and Reward and told Bews he should sharpen up his image and the overall image of Zabo. It would be $1,500 well spent, she promised. Uniforms for everyone and a bright new look for Zabo. The name on the door might read Recognize and Reward, but in this case what Pyle failed to recognize was that when doing business with Barnaby Bews sometimes there's no reward. In this case charity did not begin at home, it began right next door at Recognize and Reward. Against her better judgment, Pyle let it slide, unaware at the time her goodwill would prove to be an open invitation for Bews take further liberties, but this time it'd end up costing more than a few uniforms with the name Zabo printed on the front. A lot more, $30,000 more. Once bitten, twice shy is usually Pyle's approach to business, but 2 months after being ripped off he was back for more. Why she can't explain, but says she was somehow charmed into a deal with Bews allowing him to sell products she had in storage for a 50% cut of the profits. The wolf was now well and truly in the hen house, and it was no surprise that Bews did exactly what wolves do when presented with this sort of opportunity. When there was no money, just excuses, Pyle was apoplectic. She confronted Bews about where her share of the profits had gone. I grabbed him by the shirt and told him straight out that I needed to see some money, she said. It was a fire. Bews went into his pocket and coughed up $3,000 of the $30,000 in total he owed. It was a gesture, nothing more. For the second time Pyle had failed to recognize. There were all sorts of excuses. The money had gone to Australia, had ended up in the wrong account, it went on and on. To throw more salt on the wound, Bews decides to escape the chilly response he's been getting and flies off to sun-drenched fun-filled Hawaii for a vacation. Eventually Pyle would lose the energy for the fight. No reward perhaps, but still time to recognize the emotional cost of continuing to fight. A new viable fight simply wasn't worth it. Beaten into submission is how some might see it, but Pyle is more philosophical. Her business, unlike Bews and Szabo, has continued to prosper, and the nagging appendicitis that was Bews has finally been cut from her body. Grant McLeod knows that dull aching feeling only too well. He gave Bews more than $20,000 and hasn't seen a dime since. He was told the money was bridging finance to keep the cafe afloat until money from unpaid invoices came in. "I was hoodwinked," McLeod said. "He said he'd pay me every cent back. 8 months later I was still chasing him. In the end I just gave up. It wasn't worth ruining my life over. He had no intention of paying me back." Few spent as much time around Bews as Subhash Rajgarai. He worked for Bews for 5 years as Szabo's duty manager. The job was a ticket to a new and better life in Australia for the Nepalese-born Garai, so he kept his head down, did what he was told and didn't complain. When Szabo went under, Garai went into a state of panic. Would he be paid the 100 hours of holiday pay owing, or the 2 weeks' wages he was due? As time dragged on and there was still no money from Bews, Garai turned to the nearby St. Michael's Church for financial help. Luckily Garai's position as a secured creditor meant he was one of the first to be paid from the proceeds of the company's assets. Mention the name Barnaby Bews to used car salesman Ash Thomas and the reaction is immediate. "I wouldn't piss on him if he was on fire." He's known Bews for years, back when he was running his catering company, and even considered him a mate at one time. When Szabo went under, mates being mates, Thomas got Bews a job selling second-hand cars at Great Motors Botany, and Bews repaid the favor, Thomas says, by bagging him to the bosses. "He was making out he was the best salesman around, talking shit about me," Thomas said. To date Bews has refused the invitation to address the claims being leveled his way or address why Szabo collapsed with debts close to $500,000.